Good day, everyone. Today I will continue with the analysis of the unadjusted trial balance, and the next item after notes receivable will be supplies and other prepaid expenses. I will discuss the first, which is supplies, then afterwards the prepaid items. So this is the topic that we're going to discuss today: supplies and other prepaid items. Supplies are general-purpose consumable items which commonly have a shorter lifespan than equipment and machines, and which are stocked for recurring use, yung paulit-ulit na ginagamit. So there are a lot of classifications or types of supplies, but we're going to deal with three only here. We have the general supplies. Every office needs the basics, though we can do much with technology today. There are still those times when we need to write things down the old-fashioned way or save some hard copies of documents. These basic supplies are not usually expensive. We can buy them from any office supply store or even order them online. It's a good idea to have them on hand even if we don't think we'll use them every day, just so we don't have to run to the store every time we need some papers, tapes, pencils, or notebooks. Office supplies include pens, pencils, folders, binders, printer paper, notebooks, planners, calendar, staplers, staple wires, scissors, calculator, paper clips, post-it notes, markers, binder clips, highlighters, glue, rubber bands, desk organizer, tape, printer ink, and the like. There are a lot of office supplies that we can think of. We have this cleaning and janitorial supplies. No matter what type of office space we are working with, it's essential that we keep it clean and tidy, especially now during pandemic season that we really have to watch out watch out that all our things should be tidy and clean because of the coronavirus. Even if we have a cleaning janitor, it could help to have some basic cleaning supplies on hand, just in case there are spills or messes that need to be cleaned quickly. It's also necessary to have some basic supplies to replenish office bathroom. Examples of cleaning and janitorial supplies are all-purpose cleaners such as hand soap, toilet paper, trash cans, trash bags, and recycling bins. We have also this mail and shipping supplies. If we run a business that sells products online, then shipping supplies are a must. However, even a standard office with no ties to e-commerce is likely to have some documents or items to mail every now and then. Here are some of the most essential items to have on hand when it comes to mailing and shipping: envelopes, stationery, padded envelope, boxes, packing tape, mailing labels, bubble wrap, stamps. These are just few of the examples of supplies needed by a business, and there are a lot of kinds of supplies that can be enumerated depending on the kind of business being operated. If the business is small, office supplies are among the business expenses that should be kept track of. Careful record keeping is important so that accurate financial reports can be prepared. When the business uses the accrual basis of accounting, unused office supplies are recorded as an asset account called supplies, and the use of these supplies is charged to an expense account called supplies expense. But if the business is not stocking a large amount of supplies, instead of recording purchases of supplies as an asset, the amount used for purchasing the supplies can be recorded as an expense right away by using the supplies expense account upon purchase. So there are two ways of recording supplies, the asset method and the expense method. If the account supplies is debited to record the purchase, the method being used is an asset method. But if the supplies expense is debited, then the method used is expense method. How will the supplies expense and supplies on hand at the end of the period be recorded? When the supplies were bought, purchasing is an external transaction because there was a source document to support the transaction and it involved a second party, the seller. The purchase of supplies is an exchange transaction, but the use of supply is an internal transaction, as does not involve any outside party, and the amount used or consumed has no source document. The amount consumed should be determined at the end of the period to present the actual value of the supplies in the financial statements. How would the using of supplies be recorded? It will depend on what was the account used when the supplies were purchased. If the account used for purchase was supplies, an asset account, the asset has already been recorded. Therefore, to record the internal transaction of using the supplies, the expense should be calculated and debited in a journal entry. If the account supplies expense was used, then the expense has already been recorded. Therefore, the remaining assets will be debited when journalizing the internal transaction. At the end of the process, the balance of supplies account should equal the value of supplies left on hand, and the amount posted to the supplies expense will equal the cost of the supplies used. Now, let's take a look at this unadjusted trial balance. The supplies account here is being used in recording purchases of supplies. Therefore, the business is using asset method in recording supplies. If the unadjusted trial balance does not have supplies, but supplies expense, then the method being used is an expense method. So take note of the account being used. Supplies, that is an asset account, therefore that is an asset method. Supplies expense, that is an expense account, therefore that is an expense method. There are two ways of recording supplies as I have previously said, the asset method and the expense method. Either method for recording supplies could be used as long as the asset account balance is equal to the unconsumed or unused cost at the end of the period. One method for recording supplies is to record the entire payment in an asset account. For example, assume that on February 1, Terima Corp pays for supplies amounting to 2,400 that can be used for 2 months. On February 1, the Terima Corp debits supplies for 2,400 and credits cash for 2,400. So this was the entry made. Debit supplies, 2,400, and credit cash, 2,400. So On the last day of February, supplies inventory was said to be 400. The entry to record expense and inventory as adjusting entry would be debit to supplies expense 2,000 and credit supplies 2,000. With this entry, the originally recorded 2,400 supplies will become 400 because we have already debited supplies 2,400 and then we credit it by 2,000, then we have 400 as a balance. And then we set up the correct amount of supplies, which is 2,000. A second method of recording supplies is to record the entire payment in the expense account using the previous information wherein Tarimacor purchased 2,400 supplies and had remaining 400 at the end of February. The entry will be supplies, the entry using the expense method will be debits to supplies expense 2,400 and credit to cash. So this is the expense method because the word expense is found in the account. On the last day of February, supplies inventory that amounted to 400 will be recorded. So the following entry will occur on February 28 to update the records. This adjusting entry has to be reversed in the next accounting period to eliminate from the records the account supplies and supplies expense. The first method needs no reversing entry considering that the balance of asset is correctly stated. However, in this method, it was expense that was debited, and during the period, the amount of expense is held in abeyance until the end of the period when inventory is taken and the amount of actual expense is determined. So the expense method is practical to use when the purchases of supplies is not material. So the corresponding adjusting entry will be to debit supplies by 400 because supplies expense has already been recorded by 2,400 as a debit. Now it is recorded as a credit by 400. There is a supplies expense of, actual supplies expense of 2,000. So when we use the expense method, it has to be reversed in the next accounting period, in the beginning of the next accounting period, to maintain the consistency of the method being used. So here is the comparison of the two methods of recording supplies. In the asset method, asset account supplies is used. So this is the asset account supplies upon the purchase. So upon purchase, the account used is supplies. When it comes to expense method, the supplies expense account is being used. In the expense method, the expense account is debited. In the asset method, supplies account is debited at the beginning or from the time of purchase. So if you are going to record the internal transaction, considering that you have already debited the asset, you can no longer debit it anymore because when you debit the asset again, you will double the amount of the asset. Now, you have to record the expense. If you record first if in recording external transaction, you use the asset, in recording the internal transaction, you have to use the expense. So you have to compute how much is the expense to record the correct transaction. The same thing with this expense method. If you used expense account in the external transaction, in the internal transaction, you have to use the asset account. You cannot use the same kind of account because that will add up to the amount. So if you debit again supplies expense, then the supplies expense will get bigger, not lesser, and you will not be able to compute for the correct amount of inventory at the end of the period. So prepayments or prepaid expenses. This refers to payments made in advance, and part of the amount will become an expense in a future accounting period. A common example is supplies, because supplies is bought in advance, which I have just discussed. Another example is paying a 6-month insurance premium in December that provides coverage from December through May 31 of the following year. So, advance payment of rent that would cover more than one accounting period. Advance payment of subscription and the like that covers more than one accounting period. So these are prepayments. The methods of recording these prepayments is similar with the methods used in recording the supplies. However, in cases of prepayments, the word prepaid is attached to the expense, such as rent. It would be called prepaid rent to make it an asset account. Insurance, prepaid insurance. Subscription, prepaid subscription. Now, to make it an expense, insurance expense, subscription expense, rent expense. So, you change the account title from asset to expense or expense to asset. So you have to learn to identify what is an expense account for a particular item. Like rent, what is the expense account for rent? Rent expense. What is the asset account of rent? Prepaid rent. So if there is the word prepaid, if it is affixed to the expense account, then that becomes an asset. So, if that is so, you can record it either as an asset method or an expense method. When the account used is coupled with the word prepaid, then that is an asset method. If without the word prepaid, then it is an expense method. So you have to look for the word prepaid to consider it as an asset. Okay, let's summarize all the internal transactions on supplies and prepayments which need to be adjusted and journalized. So we are reviewing the unadjusted trial balance to find out what items or accounts have to be adjusted or updated. So we've found supplies. We will update supplies for the unrecorded expenses or unrecorded updated amount of inventory on supplies. So supplies, the used supply should be recorded to reflect actual remaining assets and actual supplies expense to be presented in the financial statements. With regards to the prepayments, the expired portion should be recorded and prepayment should be updated to reflect the true value of asset and expense that would be presented in the financial statement. If you are learning from this presentation, please don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe button for the latest updates on this channel. Thank you, and I hope that you will continue to watch more of my videos because these are really going to be complete. I'm beginning this with a basic, and then we will end up with so many lessons until we are able to prepare financial statements. Keep safe. God bless. Thank you for watching.